Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I have a special guest on the episode with me, Joyce, where we'll be talking about many things, including intuition, leadership, and much, much more. So welcome to the show, Joyce.
Thank you, Johnny. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited.
Oh, wow. I'm excited to have the conversation as well. So I'm looking forward to it. So just a quick introduction to Joyce, and then we'll dive straight into the conversation. So Joyce is a transformational leadership consultant, a peace ambassador of social healing, and a trusted intuitive advisor. As the author of Extraordinary Leadership during Extraordinary Times and founder of Lead by Wisdom, Joyce inspires global leaders and extraordinary individuals to navigate current challenges, opportunities, and to manifest ethically positive impact in the world. Awesome. Love it, Joyce. So, Joyce, can you tell us a little bit about maybe a few highlights about you and actually what got you into this whole leadership consultant area and got you into this intuition space?
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to try to do a little maybe timeline from the time I was very young until now and the big turning points in my life that brought me to this space.
Oh yeah, I saw a little bit about this, and I'm excited to hear about this.
So when I was young, I always had an ability to be what people call now psychic, intuitive spaces, and maybe I would say predictive energetics, although I honestly believe we can't truly predict what happens because everyone has free will and choice. But when I was a kid, there were all sorts of dreams that I would have about other people. I would often get visited by people who passed, and I thought it was normal. And it wasn't normal to other people. So an incident happened when I was very young where a young child, I had a vision of a young child falling off the uneven parallel bars. And I was his classmate, and I was very nervous because I felt like it was possible that he could die. And even as a kid, to understand what that meant is unusual. So I went up to him, told him about what I had seen, and encouraged him to be more careful on those bars. And I told the teacher and I told other people, and it was not very welcomed. 2 weeks later, this young boy had exactly that experience of falling off the uneven parallel bars and dying. And it was extremely, if you could imagine, extremely traumatic for me and all those around us. And the teacher, instead of consoling everyone, including me, she treated me as if there was something seriously wrong with me and, did like this: do not come near anyone and never ever do this again. Uh, so that gift in my mind became questionable. Like, whoa, what is going on here? And I suppressed it, although when it is there and when it starts to get developed, you can't suppress it. So I was very, very fortunate that I had parents who were neutral toward it. They weren't suppressing it, they were neutral toward it and just thought it was an act of imagination. So this allowed me to tap into a connection with Source, which is where I believe it came from. I had a very strong faith at a very young age, and was told basically that this is a gift and please use it. It will help you in your life and
Mm.
it will help others and why you are here in the first place. So I began to use this when I was ready to go to college. I knew that one of the greatest uh, desires I had of being in the world was to help other people, to help make this a better place to be. Witnessing at a young age the shooting of a president and things that were happening in our world inspired that even more greatly. Like, why are we living in a world where it's okay to assassinate a president? Why are we living in this kind of world? I don't believe that needs to be true. And everything I experienced in my everyday life, I experienced a lot of struggles, but I also knew that we each had the capacity to affect change, and positive ones at that. So I began to test this out as a little kid, like, well, if all this negative could happen in the world, how can I affect change for positiveness to happen in the world? Fast forward, ready to go to college. Where am I going to go? I definitely wanted to help other people. I definitely wanted to express an understanding of logic and intuition in our world and live here in a better way. And I wanted to explore this parapsychology, the beyond the mind understanding of, wow, we could tap into not only here and now, but in realms that are unseen, that people can't see with their own two eyes, but the rest of their being. And why is that possible? And I knew I wasn't the only one. And I came to believe that we all have that capacity. But if I was suppressed in the way that I was, imagine other people and parents not being open to it and all this other all these other influences. So I looked for a school for parapsychology. Everything that was available was more in the lines of institutions that you could go to. The Rhine Institution. There were very few places to study parapsychology. There actually is an institute in London where you live called the Psychical Society, which I was intrigued with as well. So when I explored that, I discovered that it had been so co-opted by other institutions like the military, governments. Any studies on parapsychology were used in ways that I was afraid might end up, without my knowing, and harming other people. In other words, using my gifts and other people's gifts for military purposes to harm people. Not that the military is all black and white, good or bad, but that I did not want my gifts and the gifts of others to be used in that way. So I ended up going into psychology and multicultural art, which allowed me to explore this, like in Dr. Jung, his whole metaphysical, symbolic, energetic, the collective consciousness, that tapped into the parapsychology that I hoped to develop and bring into the world. So I ended up continuing my own research on parapsychology and consciousness exploration that intersected between spirituality, consciousness, and leadership in the world. And experienced many things in my life that also brought me to the writing of my book and what I bring to others. So I have been in settings that include indigenous and contemporary um, organizations, institutions, checking out what are ancestral ways of being, what are ways of leading in that context that can intersect with Western ways of leading and being as well. These all connect in some way, as I'm sure in your own life you have had things that have happened that
Mm.
just connect in this fantastic way of using our whole beings to lead versus just the logical, concrete, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a summary of where I am now and how I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Wow, absolutely. Wow, what a journey you've been on, and knowing it from a young age. But I also like what you said about we've got this ability to tap in. It's just trying to find it. So I've actually been doing a lot of work on the Think and Grow Rich book again at the moment. I'm a big fan of learning Bob Proctor's teaching, and he talks about the sixth sense, and then tapping into that sense that quite a lot of people may find it hard to get on board with, and like talking to the mental board or people outside of your reality, but you can talk to them in your head, whether they're dead or alive, and tapping into that energy and getting that for added intuition, especially when you're in times of challenge and things like that. So I know you're working with leaders, and you're kind of touching on multiple things. You're using some of this intuitive stuff to kind of get it for leaders. Now, not just leaders, but a lot of us are just like bombarded with information, decisions, day in, day out, right?
Yes.
What would you say to someone who's like so busy and that they just got this lack of clarity in their head? How can they begin to perhaps tap into this additional energy, or kind of tap into a bit more intuitively?
One of the things that is so important for people to understand, and I heard it on actually a suggestion on one of your podcasts, just take 10 minutes to, stop and take a deep breath, just sit with who you are, your your vision of the future and what you hope to see. 10 minutes a day. I love that suggestion. So, in a similar way, if we are segmenting our whole life into these time slots, we forget to see the wholeness of our being. Time slots are great. Concretely making lists are great. But if you're not taking the time to address other parts of your being, then you are going to be out of balance, and you're not going to be able to make the most discerning decisions. More than ever in our lives now, we are having to make discerning decisions. So one of the things that happens with leaders, or any one of us, going along like that, neglecting that dynamic balance of who we could be, is we start to make decisions that are not connected with our soul's force
Mm.
and our, I want to say, our ethical grounding. So sometimes I'll work with people who, let's say, are 50s, in their 50s, and they've had a lifetime of perhaps several careers, and they're what others may call at the top of their game, and they're so successful, but they feel like a failure, and they're having trouble making decisions that don't keep them in that place of success because of an ethical choice. Like, let's say they were offered something. Oh, we'll make it easier on your business if you go with us over here. We'll bring in, let's say, $4 million into your company, but we have to have a say in what happens to it. When in fact, the original goal or mission of the company is no longer looked at, and it becomes distorted because of that choice, because a person is burnt out, exhausted, not taking the time to reconnect with, why did I do this in the first place? Why did I create this beautiful company in the first place that by all ways and means looks very successful? I ask people, what does it mean to be successful? And some people have a vision that it's making millions of dollars. Now, don't get me wrong, making the resources are what is needed in order to bring into the world, in our world now, some of the things we wish to bring. So it's one resource, but it's one component of success. My biggest hope for our planet now is that we're looking for success with multiple meanings, one of which is, can we reignite a moral compass? And I'm not saying absolutely right, absolutely wrong, because no one has a stronghold on truth. But when we reignite our own moral compass, what feels truthful, and this relates to intuition as well, then when we are barraged with all of those things in our world, like you asked in the question, we can make better choices. So taking the time to sit with, quiet down our beings, and say, what is my mission in life? Do I have one? Or you might be a person who doesn't necessarily operate in that way. Some people do have a mission, do need a mission. Others are here to be free flow and move in their lives in a way that's a little different. Maybe the more creative types, right? But if they reconnect and take time to say, what is my center and moral compass? Then that other part, those other parts start to actually manifest, to follow a mission of why I'm here, or to be happy with the free flow if they happen to have that personality to be more free flowing.
I really like how you define the different types there as well, because I know this is something I've heard a lot of, and I've been caught in it myself in the past as well. And it's like, I've got to pick something and stick with it that I know that I'm going to love and want to do for life. And that sometimes we approach things in that way, right? But, you know, things can change. So have you kind of come across any individuals who are want that kind of level of certainty that they have to stick with something for life?
Yeah, and the question is, they can keep asking, is that still good for me? Is that still healthy and optimal for my well-being? Do you know that people change their careers on average 7 times in their lifetime? And it may be even more right now with the pandemic. 7 times on average. That is huge. And people who don't know that are relieved to hear that statistic, because if they think that they've failed for some reason and not sticking to something, it's just the meaning we put on it. No. Reflect on the journey of this and what you wish to bring into the world. And there are many, many multiple ways to do this. And I'll give you an example of this. And this is a little bit on the creative side. So I had a client who was extremely successful as an artist, making, I think she was making $500,000 painting, right?
Wow.
That's a lot. for an artist. And she ended up developing an allergy to the work, to the paints, to the materials, almost all the materials she was working with. That could have been devastating for her life. But instead, um, in our work together, it became a message from her body saying, okay, you've had enough of these material toxins. You have been able to express what you wish to in the world and have helped many people through your work, right? And then she got to explore, well, what else am I good at? What else, how else can I contribute? And what would I like to explore now that this has happened, this message from my sacred vessel? So it's not all about being success on a linear timeline, but how does it impact our bodies, our minds, our
Mm,
emotions, our spirits, both individually and for the collective, right?
mm,
So she was able to take the time to reflect, to explore, to then train in an area that she might be good at. She tried a couple of things and then ended up on a whole nother trajectory in a way that she had no idea was going to occur.
mm.
This is
Wow.
really important, you know?
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How we can. I've seen people completely change what they're doing as well, and actually they ended up really, really happy, even when they and what going back to what you were talking about earlier, even when they were in a perceived successful, well, successful again. Define your own success. What appeared on the outside as successful careers for them, and like business, people change their businesses as well. Like if you're an entrepreneur or solopreneur, whatever, you can change as well. Now, one thing that kind of can pop up a lot is that logical side of the brain, right? That can pop up, and it's like, well, it makes sense for you to stick with this because you've got this much experience in it, you're earning this much money from it, people are saying you're good at this. But sometimes you can get that logic come in and it can hold you, right? But there may be that intuitive or that kind of feeling in the gut, like, you know what, there's something not right about this anymore. And I think a lot of people struggle with it, and I've struggled with it as well, admittedly. So what kind of guidance would you give to someone who's logically that, and that brain's very good at logically justifying things, right? What advice would you give to someone who's perhaps got that logical justification, but they're feeling and in their body that it's not right for them anymore?
This is a really complex question, Johnny, because here's for me what is really important. You don't throw out something valuable with the replacement of something that you haven't developed as
Mm,
much. So I I value logic as much as I do intuition, right?
mm,
But if someone tends to be more logical, then they have a need to develop their intuition. That's the first piece.
mm,
And vice versa. If someone is intuitive and using the otherworldly realms to inform their choices, sometimes they lose sight of, hey, I have to set an alarm. I have to wake up in the morning. I have to have meetings and attend to them. I have to eat at a certain, at a certain time. So in order to live on this dual planet, the the balance of those is so critical and so beautiful at the same time. So, like on teams that I work with, if someone tends to be more logical than intuitive, I want to match them up so that they become a greater whole contribution and they can learn from each other. How can I be more intuitive? And the intuitive one saying, I really need to be more organized. Does this make
Yeah.
sense? Okay, so
Yes.
that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question is related to when you tend to have the logical side of your brain overriding your intuition. It's really important to be able to discern when that happens and start to track patterns of, well, should I have used my gut, my intuition? And you will begin to train to that end with yourself, just observing yourself and what ends up working as the best solution. So the way that you described it, Johnny, is if the left brain is pushing, like pushing itself in, then absolutely I might say something to you like, sounds like there's a little battle going on here, and your left brain is trying to suppress your intuition. Sometimes you need to just say, let me sit with this. If you can, if it's not an urgent choice, sit with it for 3 days and 3 nights and allow the intuition to have a voice, to be heard. Why is that intuition saying, ah, don't do this? And some people might even feel it viscerally in their bodies, like their third chakra, which is the center of our gut. That's where the gut is, right? The gut intuition. Sometimes it comes in other forms too, but you suddenly have all this tied knot in that area of your body. I gotta move my body up for a minute so you can see. Right here, just under your rib cage in the center of your vessel, and you feel it all knotting up. That's a little bit of your intuition saying, stop where you're going on this linear track for a minute. Take a moment, check in. And then maybe the next step might be a logical thing, which might be create a list. What are the beneficial aspects of making this choice, like continuing on a road and pathway? Like you said, I'm staying in a job. I'm told that I'm good at it. I'm told that I'm great at it. But something in my gut says,
Hmm.
So when you take an action afterward that combines the intuition and logic, it starts to integrate you and who you are, developing the side that's weaker and saying, calm down to the side that is stronger, wanting to power over in yourself.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about utilizing both of them and making sure they're working hand in hand so it becomes together. I mean, I've seen it done. Perhaps it didn't work out for them as they hope when someone's being very intuitive as well, like, and not just gone with the logic. Like, for example, the classic, like, quit your job to start a business, right? Well, intuitively you might be like, oh, I hate it, like, oh, I just don't like working this, I want my own freedom, my own life. And you've not got a justifiable business plan, you've not got any evidence that it's going to work yet, which obviously it's always going to be a little bit of a risk starting anything, but there's like no evidence at all. I've seen someone just quit their job and then go into it, and then they were really, really struggling financially. And that would be an example, I guess you would say, of not tapping enough into that logical side in that case. But
Yep.
sometimes we get paralysis by analysis on the other side, that we're just like so caught up in analyzing it, and we're like, okay, right, logic makes sense, even though I'm not happy, I better do it. And then there's the intuition is being ignored. So yeah, I like what you said about using the two of them together.
So I'll give you an example of that. One of my clients, lead nurse, during the pandemic, many organizations used had to use the mandate or felt obligated to use the mandate to take a vaccination. She could not because of a medical condition that she had, and she was being told that she had to leave her job unless she did. This put her in a conundrum, got her very, I would say, angry. So she had an emotional overlay and a reactive overlay. Emotions are great, but how you deal with them is really a whole nother learning and a whole nother leadership learning. So she ended up being reactive, using her intuition, saying, I gotta move on. And she almost quit her job. And so when we began working together, I encouraged her to see if she could get an extension without having to take something that would harm her, and to begin to build this new pathway, because without that, she had children, she had to take care of her children, she would have lost all of her income very soon after she would have left. And so looking for those options and kicking in the logic again totally helped her. So she was able to go through this scenario. And the irony that occurred was the mandates were removed by the time that she had done this other pathway. And then she had an opportunity to make a choice. Am I going to stay here, or am I going to do this other thing? And it was a beautiful resolution, because both it gave her an understanding of her own capacity to lead in a different way, and allowed her to see that she was capable of doing something else. But it also gave her the understanding that when you're between a rock and a hard place and it looks like you have no decisions in front of you, life is actually filled with options. And if you're only seeing it in black and white, you're not going to see the options. So that's another suggestion for people in your audience, is try to transform within, from belief that things are always black and white, to the notion that it could be black and white, but there's all these gray areas in between. And that includes solutions and opportunities to go forward as well, to make choices as well. It's often not just black and white, unless it's an emergency situation. Let's say there's a fire, and you either go and save the child or not. Then it becomes, in emergency situations, the black and white gets stronger.
Yeah, that's very true. So with leaders, the leaders you've worked with, like those who really feel like they're being successful and they're doing well within their organizations, do you find they get a good balance between the logic and the intuition?
Yes,
Yeah.
very strongly. And they might not talk about it because societally, the face of society, it's not as welcome to say, oh, Joe, who is the president of this major corporation, got his greatest idea from a dream that he had, or in the shower when a little birdie whispered something in his
Yeah.
ear, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. There's some, there's quite a lot of people who are very logical minded and have to, want to know those facts and stuff. But yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear like kind of different perspectives on leadership and how people do that as well. Now, just gonna wrap up in a minute. Been a great conversation between us today, Joyce. Really enjoyed having you on. So, in terms of the intuition, is there any kind of resources if people are perhaps wanting to find out a little bit more about that? There's any like good books or resources that you would recommend on it?
Well, I think there are so many.
Hmm.
Marianne Williamson is an author who I believe has addressed intuition really wonderfully, that makes it very practical. Um, there are others who, let's see, I'm thinking on a scientific basis, there's a book called Real Magic by Dr. Dean Radin, who kind of evokes the whole how does this work and why does it work on a practical level. I actually would encourage people to read my book because it
Hmm.
speaks about intuition and what extraordinary leadership during extraordinary times is not just about leaders who are highly leveraged leaders. It's about us leading our lives and how we can best lead our lives with anecdotes and practical applications of enhancing our intuition. The other thing I want to say about this, Johnny, is intuition, like a lot of things in our life, are also customized. I think if I bring a uniqueness to the table of leadership, it's that I approach leadership in a way that is related to our uniqueness. I truly believe that just like we have fingerprints, we have soul prints. And the way that we navigate through that is on that continuum between intuition and logic. And I lean away from giving formulaic suggestions to people
Hmm.
because we each have different patterns. We each have different ways that we can evoke intuition. So I would first encourage people to track themselves, maybe make a journal or record when they feel like they have this sense that something is going to happen. Like how many times that every one of us, just before a phone call comes in, says, "Oh, I think that's so and so," or they might have had a dream about it the night before. That's one thing, is to track. To also begin to look at your dream space. We sleep between 5 to 8 hours on an average. That's a third of our day, essentially, a third of a 24-hour period. What is happening in that time is all those mechanisms that we use to try to control ourselves on this planet get opened up. And so in that space, in the dream space, if we can begin to record our dreams, that will begin to tap into our intuitive sense as well. And also, the last thing is to begin to observe in a different way of inviting an intuitive sense into our life and begin to look for symbols. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a little hummingbird feeder outside of my apartment, and I literally had a hummingbird about this far from my face. My intuition said, this hummingbird is trying to tell you something. And I thought, wow, whoa, what is that about? The bird went to the feeder and pointed its beautiful, lengthy beak at it, and it was completely empty. And it looked back at me like, could you please fill this up again? And because I was listening and paying attention, and it was a symbol of something I care about, it became integrated into my life and I took action. So I went, made the syrup, put it in. The same hummingbird came back. Once again, I had an intuition. See what the hummingbird has to say. The hummingbird went to the feeder, stuck its beak in, took some serum out, came, flew to me, and literally bowed its whole head as if to say, thank you. I really needed that. These are the type of things, these littler stories and then the bigger stories about how we can pay attention to our own intuition naturally for our customized selves.
No, love it with that. That's a great example. And just, yeah, tracking and being more aware. I like what you said about dreams. I actually saw something from Jim Quick, who's brain expert, the other day about he likes to get up in the morning and he writes down what he experienced in his dreams. He's got super brain that he's trained, and he's just like tapping into that like subconscious and going into the brain and trying to recall what my intuition and my dreams have been telling me, or mainly his dream, not intuition, but his dreams has been telling him, has been a really effective practice for him. So like that one, I think I'm going to start doing that one more as well. So Joyce, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you? And I know you've got something to share with us as well.
Yes, at leadbywisdom.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to offer for your audience 50% off of my individual sessions as an introductory offer to them. And they could just send me an email through Joyce Anastasia at gmail.com and say, I would like to take advantage of Johnny 50% off. So I know that it's from your audience.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you for that, Joyce. And thank you. Appreciate that. And appreciate you for being on today. So yeah, it's been great talking to you.
You too. And I wish you great success in your desire to be successful and to bridge and dynamically integrate your logic and intuition. I love what you're doing. I love that you're ever evolving in your own leadership style. And thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast.
Of course. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, work on your self-confidence every single day.